The squirrel was magic! Beware your human heart. This is a Diabolical Index for Monday, August 26th, 2019, where the pages of the uncanny reside. Corey Dawson, as always. I'm at Moreland Manor. And I have to say, Andrew has never been quite so broken up as he is right now after the fantastic, unbelievable, infamous show. I think we can definitely say that. At Legends Barn venue, the Improvised Story Part 2. Choose Your Own Adventure live, and it was memorable to say the least. We had people coming up from Southern Kentucky, Michigan, Indianapolis, Dayton, everywhere. I'm sure I'm missing some places, but there were all kinds of people there. I mean, almost all. Was there anyone missing? I mean, I guess there may have been a couple of people missing from the network, but not very many. Everybody was out in force to support us on the show. And Andrew showed up, not quite unexpectedly, but he had said he was going to make it out there. But then he definitely made it out there. All of a sudden, there was just this lunging crash and beer splashing everywhere. And we didn't know what was happening. And turned out it was Andrew invading the... invading the sanctity of the improvisation. It was totally awesome. It made perfect sense. We were lucky to have him there. And it was a great turnout. We had some wonderful comedy. The show is on Magic Scroll Network videos somewhere, right? Yeah, so definitely check that out. The show was a blast. We're already planning others. There's also some rumblings of maybe doing some possible roasts. So we'll keep you posted on that. That should be one hell of a good time. And of course, as I'm wont to do, we were actually, I think were we heading out all together, or were we heading out to eat? When I looked behind the bar. I think it was when we were leaving to eat.
Oh,
And of course,
which one we were leaving?
peripheral vision out of the corner of my eye, we hadn't even paid our tabs yet. we were going, we were going to eat, and of course, boom. There, you can't keep books out of my eye line. I saw just this little tiny shelf of books behind the bar, and I think I was just like, "Wow, books!" or something like that. And the lady was like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure, we got a few of them here. You ever read this?" And she actually brought this out. And she's like, "Hey, you ever read any David Sedaris or Sedaris? I think it's David Sedaris." And I had only read one, Barrel Fever, and it was unbelievable. It's just, there's eccentric humor, and there's also some, there's always some sort of mystery and intrigue in there, but always humorous, always honest, and totally fantastic. So she was like, "Hey, you think you'll ever be back?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. We'll be back to although we may be back to Legends pretty damn soon." But I was like, "Yeah, I'm not so sure when I'll be back." She's like, "Oh well, just take it. I know that you'll return it." Almost like, oh my gosh, I got the pained look of every librarian I've ever met, where they just can't refuse me, but they know what they're getting into when they put a book in my hands, because I have been and probably always will be the worst overdue artist that ever existed. I'm so bad about giving books back, but that's to be expected. But let's see here. Everybody's out. Oh yeah. Ooh, books. Yeah, she was there for that. Yeah, so yeah, we had black books in the house. Emily came down for the show, and I think everybody that's here tonight was there except for Robin, I think. But blast, total blast. So for the sophomore event, I think it was awesome. Miguel from Videotainment Network was down there, kind of pulling the strings on that, and we had a birthday boy there. Ryan was there, and unbelievable. And no one got too soused to remember, so that was good. But a few people had some liquid courage to get up on stage. Of course, I have no qualms about that. Nothing phases me when it comes to that. So, yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, The Book Thief. Believe it or not, I haven't read that book or seen that movie. So I don't know. Maybe it's a form of elitism. I'm not even sure. But when something breaks huge and a movie comes out and there's Oscar buzz, usually I kind of back away, unless I've read it already or what have you. But yeah, so I don't want to wait too long to get into the meat of the thing, because it just so happened, I wasn't very discreet about it. I don't know. I tend to be an honest guy. So even in the middle of a show, I'll be like, I can't remember. I think we actually spoke about it in the non-entry number 16, the last Choose Your Own Adventure, the Goosebumps Trapped in Batwing Hall, I think it was called. And I think Andrew was like, "Hey, are you doing this again on Monday, or are you gonna wait for Thursday again?" And I was like, "What?" Because when he's in the midst of all of his prestigious cinematic glory, I always figure they're going to be on set for a few weeks or whatever. But it turned out he was only going to be there last Monday, so he assumed that I was coming back on Monday, and I guess I just thought that I was going to be doing Thursdays for a while, but nope, not so much. So I was like, "Hey, we'll see what I can find and get in there on Monday if at all possible." Turns out that through the if anyone's looked back through the Diabolical Index videos, you'll see kind of like, it's not exactly an unboxing video, but it's me going through this gigantic stack of books that I got in the mail from some lot I had bought off of eBay. And it was a wonderful stack of books that I ended up getting. A bunch of stuff I had never seen before, a lot of authors I didn't recognize, but the ones that were there were choice, absolutely top of the line. So I figured, well, you never know. I mean, different strokes for different folks and all that kind of stuff. Usually if someone reads good stuff, they read good stuff completely. So I figured it looks like a pretty good stack. So in that stack, I found this. Those Across the River by Charles Buellman. And this is an awesome... Well, no, there are a couple of things that are awesome about the book itself. Number one is I wasn't totally unaware that Ace was even putting out books anymore. Because you see these Ace fantasy, Ace horror, science fiction paperbacks from long ago. Like some of the classic pocket paperbacks came from Ace when it comes to fantasy, horror genre, science fiction. So he's not necessarily tiny, but back in the day there weren't real super big like door stops or anything like that. You can put that up from now on if you want. So when I noticed that this was an Ace book, that really kind of turned me on, because I was like, no kidding. I wasn't totally unaware they were even still making books. I thought it was one of those companies that kind of maybe got absorbed by something else, assimilated in some kind of way. And then, so I got this one off the pile, just kind of glanced at it, and I thought I would give it a shot. And also, you know, when I was talking about kind of like because no matter what anyone says, you know, if you're a full-on bibliophile, bibliomaniac, you check out the edition. It doesn't really matter to me a lot of times what edition I can get. If I'm just into reading it, if I can get it, then it doesn't. I don't have to have the biggest and the best, and you know, the smartest and the brightest, all that kind of stuff. But when I come across one accidentally, it's wonderful. And in this case, you have in the picture right there, you can't really make it out on there, but on the top, it's kind of like I don't know what you'd call that, bifurcated. I don't think that really makes sense, but with this, you know, it's got kind of like the two sides of the coin, and on the top, it's, you know, it's a little bit more matte finish, and it's got like a rougher textural feel, and on the bottom, it's almost got this weird kind of like I can't remember what that's called, when you lenticular maybe, where when you kind of move from side to side, you almost see like a little bit of a rainbow effect, like go across and it's shinier, and the tree is upside down, so it's kind of like this flip side, which there couldn't be a more apt cover for this book. And you know, with kind of like the subtitle for tonight, the character as Misdirection, that's kind of that like line you skirt when you have a narrator. Usually it's when the narrator is kind of more of like a personalized narrator. A lot when it goes for like kind of like the omnipotent narrator, since they see all, a lot of times, not every time, they play, you know, authors play with the form and all that kind of stuff. But usually it's, if they see all, they tell all, or at least they will tell all eventually. And in this, it's so difficult. It's so mind-blowing when you find out that this is Buellman's first book. He's a poet, and I guess he's worked in Renaissance festivals I think for like over a decade. So he did a lot of, you know, acting in person, up close and personal with people, and he'd stay in character, all that kind of stuff. And when you think of a Renaissance festival employee, you kind of think of like the fanciful and kind of like hams, overacting, and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that struck me about this book is, and I hate this is going to come off bad, but I can't think of any other way of saying it. It's such a mature approach. In this book, there are no hallmarks of a novice, of an amateur. It's so balanced, and it's so tempered, almost to the point where when I was actually speaking with someone about, you know, what I was doing next, and how, you know, how it looked out in the public eye and stuff, and this is one of those rare occasions. Usually you see a book that's out and it kind of strikes your fancy or whatever, and usually it's, you know, everybody likes it, everybody hates it, or you have maybe like 50-50 split or something like that. In this case, I was even more pumped because I think it was like a third of the way through it, and it boggled my mind how absolutely flat out well written it is. So I was just like looking around to see what other people had to say about it, and it turned out that there was, I mean, not quite. It was a little bit skewed toward the better end of things, but it had every star you could get. Usually you'll see kind of like a bunch of 5s, a bunch of 4s, a few 3s, a couple of 2s, all that kind of stuff. It was I mean, it wasn't completely balanced, but there were entries in every blank. So I was like, whoa, this is kind of a divisive book. And so I was like, well, that could be bad, that could be good. You never know. Especially, I didn't even know that it, like I said, I didn't know that it was his first book until a little bit later. So it blew my mind. But when it comes to the character as Misdirection, in this book, flat out, there are a lot of quotes, a lot of blurbs from writers that are basically saying, this is more like F. Scott Fitzgerald trying on kind of like the hat of horror or something. In fact, I think it might be as much F. Scott Fitzgerald as Dean Koontz. I mean, I wouldn't have said Dean Koontz. I think I would have gone more for Paul Tremblay, because Koontz has a definite framework, a definite checklist that he has to fulfill in his books. So, Yvonne, rock on, Yvonne's here. That's cool. Thanks for coming out. And everyone, of course, but she doesn't come out that often, so that's pretty cool. You got an actual author in the house, so she might have something to say about this. But in this book, the reason why it's misdirects so much is that, in my opinion, you can have likable characters, but usually the likable characters pale in comparison to this, this plot that they're yoked to, or, the definite implications of everything that's happening around them at all time. So you can get into kind of like the meat of the story and the thrust of the momentum. In this case, the characters, to say center stage would actually have them kind of standing too prominently. I think it's one of those things where you pay attention so much to the characters. It's not so much that they're beating you over the head or they're jumping, into frame. You just pay attention because you totally, you fall in love with these people because they're not simple. They're flawed. They're charming. They're intelligent, and they're wounded. So you have, this mix of stuff that, you could easily see in a Steinbeck, or you could easily see in, I almost said Twain, but not necessarily. But you might see it in like a Hemingway type of setting, and that's kind of where we're speaking to here, though, too, because this takes place, and that's another misdirection. It kind of takes you aback a little bit when you find out when this is taking place, because in a lot of ways, despite this new environment, they're fish out of water, but they're very capable. So that's not as much of a handicap as you would think. So there's not a whole lot of instances where you see them out of their depth until the depth starts to become kind of like not so good. But it's one of those things where this is one that I am probably going to be forced to be really vague when it comes to what goes on after a certain point, because going into a cold is paramount. You have to go into this completely cold in order to get the absolute bite of it, because you're reading along, and it's not to say that it's unexciting or anything, but something is happening. And it's funny that like this book like blew my mind like in every way, but in this real super quiet, balanced way, not necessarily ordered way, but completely balanced, where it's not as if like, well, we've dwelt too long with these people in their home in these little quiet moments and stuff, so the roof's got to cave in. there are actually a lot of parts in this book where I was kind of taken aback because there was this little moment, and I thought, okay, well, what does that have to do? What's going to happen next? And then something would happen next, and it wouldn't necessarily have to do with that, but it would be totally organic because that's exactly what it would be like in real life. Let's see. There you go. I love these conversations in the comments. Because I mean, I've got nothing but book lovers here tonight. So, I guess you just like kind of start at the beginning, which, and I actually told one of the listeners, Emily from Black Books, I can't remember if it was last night or today, but I related that the beginning of this book is unreal provocative, which once you start going into the book, you get lulled into this false sense of security. But it's not played up. It's not overbearing. It's not so plotted out that you see it coming a mile away, and then you just, you're saying, okay, well, if we go through here, then, the dominoes are starting to fall. It's a really super organic thing, and it's really unusual. It's a really unique book because you'll think that something's about to happen. Something does happen, but it's in this really super easy to it's easy to believe. All the stuff that happens in this book is easy to believe. Nothing goes so far. It's totally shocking in some parts because the stuff that happens, it doesn't necessarily come out of nowhere. You have this dread, and then something will occur, but it's so believable and understandable and imaginable that it just knocks you off your gate a little bit. You're like, oh, this could absolutely happen exactly the way it did. And thinking of, someone who reads a lot of horror and stuff, when it occurs to you what this would be like to experience what happens in some of these moments, it really, one of the things I see coming up, keep coming up in the authors, different authors that have read the book, and F. Paul Wilson was one, gave it a glowing review, and I don't often see him talking about books, so that was totally great. The father of Impairment Jack right there. So I was like, when authors give things props, I guess it kind of smooths the way, especially when you haven't heard of an author. But for me, it could totally go. I've had, you disagree. Not everyone is going to be so much an authority that it's just going to go across the board and everyone's going to agree with what they say. But in this case, they said, don't, whatever you do, read this book as soon as you can, but whatever you do, be careful about reading it at night. And to me, that's always good copy, and it always gets you reeled in and all that kind of jazz. But in this case, of course, I scoffed at it. I was like, I'm reading this at night. That's where it's going to get good. That's where it's going to be good. So, yeah, he couldn't have been, or whoever said that, or however many said it, they couldn't have been more right. Reading this at night, just due to the fact that, you're going through it and you're with these people. They could be next to you today. You could have seen them on the street. And then something happens that absolutely could have happened in your life at some point in time. Even though you're in you might be in a foreign place that you haven't been all your life and all that type of stuff. The newcomer. For it to have happened to anyone would have... I keep talking about... I'm sorry. I don't want to belabor this too much because I think I'm going to have to talk about it a little. Just because it was unreal how much punch this little moment had for me. So, okay. The very beginning, I hesitate to call it a prologue because it's just, number one, it doesn't... I'm looking right at it, Andrew.
I'm tripping. I didn't change it. I was like, he's not looking at the right camera. Sorry.
I think that fall gave Andrew a little bit of water on the brain. We'll see. But,
I hit transition, but it went back to the old one.
Well, what are you going to do? So, the very beginning. The very, very beginning. The absolute beginning. Okay, I can't help it. I have to read the first line. I can't help it. So I open this book and I'm kind of thinking, well, this should be a nice yarn to go through. And this is like after the acknowledgments, he's a nice guy. Okay, so first line of the book is, he came out to see me in the cage because I belonged to him. All right? Now, what do you take from that? About 10 billion things you can take from that. And you go through this little, I think it couldn't have been more than 3 pages long. And it doesn't give you much to go with. But what it does give you is completely horrifying. So then, when you get into the actual chapter 1, it starts with, where is it? I don't even know why I had to read it. Because he says something like, this is how it started. So, you know that, you're getting it straight from the horse's mouth. The lead character, Orville Francis Nichols, goes by Frank. I mean, who wouldn't? And it's really strange because he has Orville kind of has a ring of the country to it for me. So when he kind of descends into this place where he goes, to see him kind of referred to as the highfalutin one it's kind of funny, especially since it goes by Frank and all that stuff. But brace for provocativeness, she says. So you have a disgraced professor of history, Frank Nichols, and his wife, Eudora, she goes by Dora, who was the wife of the professor of English at U of M. They both attended U of M. So, he sees her at some sort of luncheon and instantly falls head over heels in love, which you see throughout the book. That never wavers. You think that it would, that kind of a good, cheap, easy way of causing conflict in the book, or a rift, between the everyday and some sort of, unknown country would be to, drive a wedge in between those two. In this case, as far as I'm willing to tell you, it doesn't occur. And there are very, very many things that surprised me about this story. And one of the major ones was kind of the way they spoke to each other was really, it wasn't kind of like dated. They didn't, since, this is supposed to be the late 30s, you would think that they would go for some sort of dated framing of speech, or the way people talk to each other in private or public, how that would differ and all that kind of stuff. And it absolutely doesn't. The dialogue is fantastic, which is kind of like, that's totally a mark of any good story is the dialogue being good. I think that it's definitely way up there with descriptive powers and stuff like that. Chapter 2, your father smelled of elderberries. You always know when, oh my God, when the Merrills are here, it always, goes off like a shot. So, I loved it. Hearing them talk to each other at home, in the car, in the travel, during a move, it totally made sense. This byplay they had together, and they've been together for at least a couple of years by this point. And she had to leave under a cloud. He was disgraced, and they receive a letter, and they're living, in someone's spare room at the time, poverty stricken, and this is during the Depression as well, which kind of looms large in this. But being that it's a small town, you can see, you can definitely feel the grate of poverty when, they had little to begin with, and then once the Depression hit, then it got much worse, especially since there's another town kind of bordering their town at a distance, and they're the ones that have, I mean, at this point in time, no one has plenty, but they're at least, doing a little bit better than Whitbrow. It might be Whitbrow, but I say Whitbrow. That seems to be the way it's supposed to be pronounced. So they received a letter from his aunt Dottie, and I thought it was interesting that her name was Dottie because, when she writes the letter, there's actually a note attached to it that says, this is her lawyer. Just be aware that she was under opiates at the time, because she ended up having cancer of the stomach. I believe it was the stomach. And she's writing to him, and it's there are so many little touches to the story that makes you think of much older stories. But somehow it doesn't have that kind of like hackneyed, antiqueness to it that seems kind of clunky in the modern day. It was awesome. There was so many little mysteries and secrets and just eccentricities, especially when it comes to like the characters and the way they interact with each other and stuff. But you have this mysterious letter. So the letter, just in short, basically says, there has been, this inheritance of this house down through our family, and it passes to you naturally. It passes to you. Don't move here. Don't live in the house, basically, is what she's saying. And that immediately I was just like, oh man. It just totally pulled me in, especially since you're already kind of living with these people. To have this kind of like mystery get tossed in their lap, and not to have them overreact to it. There's so many reactions and emotional flights that they take that they just seem so damn real. That they, when you're reading this letter, you're kind of reading it over their shoulder because you see like the italics and stuff, and it's from his point of view, apparently from a future time, because he's telling the story, in this way where he says stuff like, but that wasn't the end of it, or this is before the bad stuff occurred, and all those things. So the letter is saying, you have this house, but don't come. Sell the house. Never come here. And she records it as bad blood. There's bad blood here. No one's stayed well that's ever been here after what happened. And that's kind of like the crux of the thing that, of course, keeps getting shoved to the side. Frank wants to write a book, and he wants to write a book about his past, which is to say, like the lineage of his family. And it just so happens that there is a pretty hoary, hairy lineage going on here, where he is descended from the Savoyans and Lucien Savoyan. And this guy was, during the Civil War, he was a slave owner, a massive slave owner. And he was against the emancipation. So when everything went down and the tide shifted, he actually fought emancipation. And due to his railing against it, the slaves actually stood up, and there was a massacre on the plantation. and they took it back for themselves. So he was known for his cruelty and his allegiance to an obscure, not obscure, an obsolete philosophy, and it cost him his life. And it was only fitting because he had tortured and killed a lot of people under his yoke. So he has this in his past, and being a historian, he wants to kind of like air out his own dirty laundry and maybe make a name for himself in doing it, and maybe exorcise some demons along the way, especially since he's going back to where this all happened. He ignores his aunt's warning and goes to Canary House in Whitbrow, which is right across the river from the Savoyan plantation, which was in the woods. So now we enter Whitbrow, and it's an amazingly rich cast of characters, but not so. They're not caricatures. They don't have this grand, if there's such a thing as kind of like grand cornpone affect to them. You can't do that and still keep it as grounded as it is. I mean, especially when it's strange to even say grounded when you think about what occurs. But that's exactly what it is. They come into town and they have movers, and make no mistake, there is a huge racial element to this book, because you have the time period, you have the history of the plantation, you have the history of what went on there. So this town hasn't let go of a lot of things that are they're out of our reach now, and rightly so, and maybe in some parts not as much as we would like. A lot of the things that we thought were dead and gone are they're all over the news now. So in this case, there are a lot of different emotional ranges to this book where it's just so damn believable. Take a drink, everybody. I think that's one of their drinking games tonight. Believable and something else, I can't remember. But it's a shame, but we definitely still recognize it, especially in the tenor of what's going on right now. So at its heart, this is a town that's bitten by the Great Depression. But I can't help but have this strange Wicker Man, The Village type of flavor to this, because despite them, having their gospel and they have their general store and all that, all these kind of these twinges of maybe even like the Stephen King, like small town boy type of stuff, or in some cases like the Ray Bradbury thing, and maybe even some Lovecraftian stuff. I hesitate to say that because I think that gives the wrong impression, but there is a little bit of dialectics happening in the speech, but not so much that it's insulting to anyone, but it's definitely there. So you have basically, a professor and a teacher, because she became a teacher in this town. So they're basically a couple of academics coming into a town where they are to find out has a chasing of the pigs. And to even say it kind of sounds like, the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. But that's not, bless you, that's not what it is at all. It is much more in the vein of something that would happen at Summer Isle, where they have, the great chase of the pigs. And it's an offering. And there's a pastor in town who basically says, the food are given to us, and we have dominion over the animals, and they're given to us. So if we give them back, that is not, that is a tribute. So the little girls make these rings of flowers, and they put them around the pigs' heads. And every farmer has his turn to give up two pigs. I believe it's two pigs, or one pig from two farmers. I can't remember off the top of my head. So they kind of have this. It's almost like a turkey pardon in the middle of the town square, and the pastor comes out and says, the animals come from the field, and we raise these animals as our own, and we give back to that. Who gave them to us? We give them back to them. So they chase the pigs out to this ceremony, and then they chase the pigs to the woods, and the pigs disappear into the woods. And it's a big to-do. It's one of the biggest things to happen. And they have a social where, strangely enough, Dora and Frank are invited, and that's not as much. There's nowhere near the amount of kind of like conflict that you would think would happen when two academics came to this town. Really refreshing. Totally refreshing. You would think that, from word one, they would be ostracized or shunned, or people wouldn't speak to them or close their doors to them. And there is a moment where, at the very beginning, they'll take a walk and they'd see, a candle lit in someone's home in their window, and they'd know someone was there, but they wouldn't wave hello and all that stuff. But it dries up pretty quick because these two are very super genuine people. They don't put on airs, and they have a lot of rambunctiousness to them. And I think that when the characters meet them, it comes across. So Dora cares about the children in her class. It's a one-room schoolhouse, so she teaches the children. And so, because of that, she kind of becomes like an instant pillar, an instant authority, at least, to some of the parents who care. But no one can stop asking Frank about when he's going to, write this book, because they all know of his ancestors. And they ask him if he's Dottie's kin and all this kind of stuff, Aunt Dottie, who sent the letter. But there was no inkling to the town that she had actually forbidden him to stay in the house. And so it's the Depression. So there's a bit of a debate about whether or not they should still release the pigs, because they do it monthly. And the selling of a pig would mean a lot to some of the farmers, especially the ones that aren't doing so well. A lot of the farmers' kids are barefoot most of the time, and they won't go to school because they're too busy, trying to get a greater yield to sell at market and all that type of things. And there is one character in particular, and I think it's kind of noteworthy that his name is Martin. And the first thing I thought of when it kind of gets into things, Martin is the only other kind of intellectual. I guess he's intellectual in the range of more of an eccentric. And his shack is actually at the borderline of the woods. I think it's on the other side of the river, but I can't be sure about that. They're a little unclear about whether or not he's at the boundary of the woods, but I can't remember if he's on the woods side of the river. I think he might be. Which kind of like lends itself to almost like this hermit of the woods type thing, except he's not, he takes a liking to Frank. That doesn't, it gets a little bit strained at a certain point, but he's just awesome. He stinks of cheap cigars all the time, and he has a still. He makes moonshine that even they kind of put a rumor out there that even the pastor might get some of that. And the chief of police knows everything, and everyone knows everything. You can't hide anything in a small town. So at one point, one of the men of town, where there are very, very few women in view, because being that this is like the late 30s, and this is kind of set in a place that may not have even progressed that far in the timeline. So the women are basically at home. The only females you see in the story a whole lot are the children and Dora. And it changes a little bit. There's kind of a little bit of a spurring to action with Dora being in the picture because she isn't anywhere close to a mousy subject. She goes for the throat always, and she she knows that she's a hothouse flower, but her eyes are only for Frank. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the town doesn't go gaga over her. And she's got a brain in her head and makes it known. So she's a powerful entity in this town. But she also wears her heart on her sleeve as well. So the children take an instant liking to her. And that's why it becomes such a battle between them with what happens later on in the book. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Basically, they have this giant social after the race of the pigs, and that's where everyone kind of gets to meet this couple. And when they meet Martin, he gives Frank a standing invitation to play chess, because they'll play. He says everyone will play checkers with you and they'll smoke you, but they don't know a knight from Shinola. So he's led out to the river, because he wants to find out where this plantation is. That kind of is or at least it's supposed to be the center of what he's doing there. He would have stayed away, but he has to kind of, if he had never met Dora, he may have stayed away. But now that they've kind of thrown over their whole worlds to be together, he has to make something of it other than just this fantastic love and lust, as it turns out. This is actually a very sexy book. I was blown away by how candid some of the stuff was. And you think, well, it's life, but then you think, but it's 30s. So you kind of have to think of it as that, there are a lot of things that we see in movies and older books that probably weren't true, or at least were a watered down version of the case, because everybody does it. You have to. That's the way the world is made. So, but it never gets tawdry, and it's all just so damn unique. So I could honestly talk about it is so, hopefully I don't have this incredible look of pain on my face the whole time. It is so difficult not to just tell all about this thing. It is such a rocking good yarn. But there are things that happen. And as soon as he's taken to the river, the guy he's with, I think it was Lester, says, there you are. And he says, would you mind showing me around to the Savoyan plantation? And he says, no one goes past the river. No one crosses to the woods. And it just kind of gets left at that. There isn't a whole lot of drama. There isn't a whole lot of kind of like Crypt Keeper type of warnings, omens, portents about what could happen if he goes over there. They just basically say no one goes there except the pigs, and they never come back. So, of course, being the guy that he is, he was wounded in World War I, or the Great War. He was wounded in that, saving a friend, and it's difficult for him to even cross through lines of trees because of it. He ends up getting the shakes and almost has kind of like the 30s equivalent of a panic attack whenever he's in that environment due to his time in France. So for him to even be so driven as to go into the woods, despite all of the warnings and with his trauma, it kind of says a lot to it. It kind of speaks a lot to his character. But he sees something in the woods that there's no doubt about it. it chilled me to the bone when he went into the woods. And throughout the course of the book, bringing Dora into his life has helped calm his horrors from the war, and he mostly looks back on it to the kind of like the fonder times of his time spent in Britain after in his convalescence and stuff, because basically his best friend was shelled in a trench during the war, and he went to basically stop these guys from burying him on the spot, saying, you know, he meant to bring him back to his mother and stuff, and a shell drops in and just blows his back to pieces, and he loses his hearing, and his friend is just vaporized. So he's carrying a lot of stuff around with him. They've got the weight of leaving their names basically behind in academic circles, and his job is ruined. Her marriage has been destroyed by their just you just can't resist it. They couldn't resist being with each other. It was so meant to be in their eyes that nothing or no one was going to stop them, and they destroyed every bridge they had to make it happen. So they have that. He has the war and the horrors of what he's seen and what's happened to him, and kind of like the aftermath. And he enters the woods just to find the plantation. And as he's walking through, he kind of starts to lose the trail, and then he sees these two trees like silent sentinels on either side of the trail. And right at waist level, it looks like they've been gored across. It's like slashed across. And he knows that this is like the entrance to something. And with kind of, I guess you could say, with the earthly horrors of what happened there, being in the woods by yourself, surrounded by the trauma of your past, and then finding this kind of like this gate to the other side, it definitely puts him in a state. But he trudges on. And it's unreal. I'm not going to tell you. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I want it, and it's gonna hype it up more than it needs to be, because it really is. It's not that fantastical what happens, but you kind of have to see it for yourself in your mind's eye, and you kind of have to experience it as if it was something that just were to happen to you in this wilderness, in order for you to kind of understand why it would throw someone off kilter. So, there are repercussions to the debate about the chase of the pigs. When he returns to the town, I will let you know that much. When he returns to the town, there are talks of stopping their ritual. There's no doubt about it. You have to consider it a ritual. It's not some sort of strange lower class ceremony. It's most definitely a ritual, because they're serving some sort of god, whether or not they believe in the pastor or not. And the chief of police says things under his breath which sound like prayers, but he feels like he's sinning even saying them, because he's basically saying, God help me for choosing to be what I am in this town. Because the debate comes to an end. And actually Dora takes a hand in the debate as to whether or not to set them free anymore. Because she's seen what the children look like. She's seen she's seen kind of like the hardships they've had to go through, and what people are missing due to that. there are some children that aren't even being allowed at the school anymore due to the hardships. So, the pigs stay in their pens. And almost immediately, the town is thrown into upheaval. And it's such a classic notion. It's so classic even to be kind of before the advent of American fiction, where you have these things that kind of foretell doom, and but they're done in the service of some sort of need, or greed, or faith, or whatever. They're all kinds of things that might start a chain of events that would cause something like this to happen. But once the pigs stay home, then there's a wanting. Something is in need. Something that was satiated before has now grown feral in this starvation. And it comes, in the form of many forms. A rending. There's a rending. There are deaths that seem like they could be disconnected from what's happening, but it just adds to kind of like this fog of doubt as to whether or not these things could actually be true. And Dawn Frank are in the middle of it. By this time, when it comes to her being a teacher and him spending his time in the general store and kind of making do, becoming one of the men of the town, it's wonderful to see, because you would think that the conflict would have started with them, but actually they become beloved in the town, because the new are taking the places of the old when they're struck down and when they're cleaved from the town due to this abstinence. And there are new people. It kind of gives you that feeling of intruders. You would have thought that the intrusion would have been done by the disgraced academics coming to town, but it kind of shifts over once they get standing in the town. It shifts over to mysterious vagrants that make their way into town, and it really gives you the flavor of older works, more classic works. And I think that's where the misdirection comes in yet again. You see these things, and it gives you this feeling that this is this classic story. It gives you such a feeling that this story has been told by a great storyteller from long ago. When you come into places like this and see these people, and very, very, it gives you kind of like a Tom Sawyer aspect, but not quite that old. Nobody's chewing hay and all that kind of stuff. But it's it really doesn't make sense that this guy was this good on his first time out. And it just so happened that I accidentally, I think I've got a couple more of his books somewhere in my piles, in my boxes somewhere. I know he wrote one called The Necromancer's Wife, and The Suicide Motor Club, which is that's a total provocative name. So it seems to me like he's got a really wide range. And when you write characters this well and situations this well, dread and omens, but the kind of like the realism of home behind closed doors with not so young lovers. These people are adults. This isn't like some sort of casual high school fling, and yet to make it as sumptuous as it is, I think that it really takes everything seriously, and it takes the idea of love seriously. And also the idea of betrayal seriously. When you betray your gods, you might feel it across your chest and your back, or your neck, even. It's taken so much. It's taken so much. It gives you, when it comes to the, like I was saying with the narration, when he says stuff like, but that wasn't the worst of it. Or, and, if he says, and, this is to say that it hadn't even begun yet. Or they hadn't seen the worst of it. Or we were to be judged further. Or things like that. It doesn't give you that feeling like he's about, it makes you think of him. I mean, you say he's not even the character anymore. You know these people. You don't think that it's just going to cut off there and then it's going to be like commercial break or like chapter break. And then it'll, totally go to some other place in town, some other conversation with the townsfolk and all that kind of stuff. It's great because it sets you up and then you see it, and then you realize that it's been in your eye line like the whole time, and that does not squash the power of it. But like Boris Balkan in the Club Dumas, it was much more of a pulpy, ham-fisted way of going about it. And that's not saying that I don't. That's one of my favorite books ever. But this has a much higher bar, definitely. And you look over the reviews and you'd be like, wow, man, Corey's really talking this book up. This must be great. But it only got a 3.8 on Goodreads or whatever, and it's because of this spectrum. There are some people who love the slow burn. There are some people who, want this grisly horror like right in your face. The thing about this book is that it's not what it's not telling you. That's kind of that's the craziest thing of all. It's not what it's not telling you. It's telling you everything. But it's just taking its time doing it. It doesn't keep things from you that if a character is seeing something, you see it. Not necessarily instantly, but you'll see it. So it's not this suspense due to blindness or ignorance and all that kind of stuff. It's suspense because you're thinking to yourself, you're empathizing with it. You're sympathizing with their reaction. You're empathizing with the, with what's happening for these people. It doesn't come as a surprise, and yet you're still shocked. Like, you see it happening, and you cannot stop it. And it occurs to you that this could totally happen anytime. And just he's a poet. The guy's a poet in life. And you would think that would give this like weird flowery, uppity, self-serving thing. It doesn't do that at all. At some points, it's so damn lyrical, but you don't really even notice it until it's already over. You just think, wow, that was like a beautiful paragraph, and all he's doing is talking about like the dent in his car. Like it's such a subtle, crafty way of getting it done. And I can totally see, there's no doubt about it, I can totally see someone going after this thinking to themselves, yeah, man, this is on, I mean, I don't know if it is or not. I haven't looked around that far to see whether or not it's on a bunch of horror lists, but I think I've talked about this before too. It's great now. I think that some of the best horror, sci-fi, and fantasy that's coming out right now, it doesn't necessarily have it plastered all over it. Like, this just says a novel. I love that. I love it that you can go into a fiction area and find just the scariest shit you could possibly find in there. And that's why I hesitate to say, well, This book, I do it often. I'm sure I do, but I don't like doing it. But I was kind of trying to think of something that'll be like, well, this is like such and such mixed with whatever. And one thing that came to mind for me was Lord of the Flies, where you see kind of like the savagery of people come out, and when everything starts to kind of like fall down around their heads, that's when Martin, who's the closest to the river, Martin is the closest of the Whitbrow people to be near the river. No one else will dare be so close, and he's the closest, and therefore he has this knowing about things. When that last time when Frank comes out of the woods on his little perilous journey that I've skirted around about as much as I possibly can, he is totally shaken to his core. He can barely walk without stumbling due to what's happened. And he goes to Martin's shack. And him and Martin, you know, they were fast friends. Fast friends. But when he shows up at the shack unexpectedly and says, you know, as not to say something incredibly freaky and creepy as hell just happened with no explanation, can I please come in? No. He just basically says, you know, I'm taking you up on that invitation to chess. And Martin tells him to get the hell out of his property, basically. And he can't believe his ears, because everything, you know, he was tight with this guy at the social and stuff, and he will not let him in. And he's a taxidermist. I don't know if I mentioned that. He's a taxidermist. So he basically tells him, he says, you know, get out of here. I don't care what happened to you. This is blah, blah, blah. He's really bent out of shape, which gives you the impression of knowledge. You know, he can just either he knows that kind of like something's in the wind, or he witnessed what happened, because at one point he says, you know, that last time when you were there fishing, when you took photos with your camera, I'm probably in them somewhere, because I was going over my still and whatnot, so you probably didn't see me, but I saw you, which gives you like an ominous feeling to this guy. But he's so honest about everything. He's like a curmudgeon sort of, but he's much more. He's got a lot more class. Sometimes it seems like it's kind of. It's almost as if he's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because he'll say something that has like an extreme amount of intelligence, and then all of a sudden you'll see him running around like in a skin or whatever. But he says, if you don't get out of here, and he takes his camera and he hands Frank a bicycle. And he says, I'm taking your camera, you're taking my bicycle, and if you don't get out of here, I'm going to send you back to your wife with a glass asshole. And I thought that was really funny. Because I guess that must have been part of the taxidermy process. I don't know if they put a bottle inside of the torso or what to keep the shape. I'm not even sure. So he's kind of taken aback, because he's like, what the... It's like, this crazy ass thing just happened in the woods, and I am totally freaking out, and this guy is sending me away. You get the inkling later on that sometimes you can get someone to do what they're supposed to do a lot easier with anger than you can with understanding. So he may have saved his life doing it that way. But then everything goes crazy. As soon as Martin hears that because he stands up in the middle of, I mean, I'm tempted to say court, but it's kind of like the city council meeting or whatever. And doesn't it sound just so normal? All this sounds so normal when I say it, but you'll know what I mean when you take it on. He stands up and he says, you know, I can't really give you the reasons why it's important for you to keep sending the pigs out into the woods, but if you don't, then I can't be blamed for what happened. I had to say my piece, and if I had my way, all of you would disappear off the face of the earth. I don't like any of you and all this stuff. So, I mean, it just smacks of honesty when someone says, I hate your guts, but something bad is going to happen to you if you do this. So the vote comes down. The chase of the pigs is off. And he actually drives around town howling. He's so drunk that he howls because of I guess it's almost like it kind of gives me the impression of kind of like the Judean like tearing of the shirts, like in this almost like this religious terror, this religious sadness and woe. And I think that's kind of what was going on. Like it kind of comes off at first like he's just some drunken lunatic, but when what happens later happens, you kind of get the idea that he was actually kind of like mourning these people before it actually occurred. Because since he's so close to the woods, he may know more than a little about what's happening. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. It just doesn't seem like I said much at all about this, but they basically find that their town is being stripped of its dearest loves, and it's any sanctity that had ever been is lost, completely shredded to time because of their sacrilege, basically, I guess you could say. But nothing can ever prepare you, and nothing will ever describe what is to happen and what Frank and Dora are exposed to. Just being affiliated with this town and the history of his family, which makes it all the more, people were talking about Peter Straub and Stephen King's It and all that stuff, and I think that is I think it's a poor estimation of what's going on in this story. I think it's much older than that. I believe, if I remember correctly, I think that Buellman won the Shirley Jackson Award. So if anyone's read The Lottery, like that, there's a lot of The Lottery in this book. And Frank is a stand-up guy, since he doesn't have a whit of cowardice despite everything that's happened in the war. He comes to be one of these people. So, when things happen and a band is put together to go into the woods, he doesn't hesitate. And, there are things that are unearthed and set before them, and unbelievably rich. This book is so rich. Okay, so yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it there. I would like to talk to you off air about it. If anyone picks up the book, will you put the address up? I'm gonna give you the Diabolical Index. It's a new email address that I put together, so we can kind of talk about these books. And get all spoilerific with it if you want to, and it's a little bit more of a private thing. Sometimes when it comes to like the messenger and those services, you can't quite get as much meat into it as you'd like, and you might not be able to get to it throughout the day and stuff. So just look up here, the email address is there. Maybe when it's reposted, I'll put the link in there proper. But anyone who wants to talk about it after you've given it a shot, Those Across the River by Christopher Buellman, let me know. And maybe it'll show up in the questionable appendix. I'm still working on that. I've got a lot of transferring to do from one place to another to make a few storehouses of the material that we're putting out. I apologize for how vague everything had to be, only because I'm really curious to see what happens when everyone takes this on themselves. So Those Across the River by Christopher Buehlman. Check it out as you're at your nearest opportunity. And don't be surprised if the unexpected happens. And basically, I mean, I would say you never truly have a sense of total security in the book because you experience the trauma of war. You experience the insult of the infirm. I mean, they go to see a friend of his aunt's, and just it's that whole idea of once you reach a certain point in age, you don't give a shit about what you're saying to people, and especially since he's talking to people who existed during the Civil War. So when he's trying to kind of, whittle this information out of him about his great grandfather, or it might be even great, but I think it's great grandfather. They don't hesitate for a moment to kind of get into the old ways and tear them apart. But the characters are rich. The subject matter is so insanely cunning. It kind of gives me this idea that I'm kind of afraid to read his other stuff because if it's I mean, this is, I mean, okay, I don't want to put out the idea that this is a perfect book. It's not perfect. But if this is as good as it gets at the very beginning, I can't even imagine what his further books are going to be like. And especially, I mean, it seems like the pace, I don't foresee a book called The Suicide Motor Club being anything less than fast-paced. So I'm really interested to see what happens next with him. And this is, I think I started reading this, as soon as we spoke about it, I started thinking about what was going to happen, Thursday, and then we had the show on Friday. I didn't have a ton of time to find something else to go through, so I think that I may have picked it on Friday. I started reading it on Saturday, and I'm not the slowest reader ever, but I'm not the fastest either, because especially for this, I definitely want to go through it with some sort of a comb. It might not be as fine-toothed as some, but with this one, I was really savoring it a lot. So I think that Mel and Lucy lost some time with me over this one because I was just engrossed in it. I had the celestial white noise like headphones on, so like nothing was getting in the way, and I read mostly at night. I was getting my true minutes and hours in, and it does not disappoint. I totally recommend Those Across the River, and I would really love for you all to go to the email after you've read it, and let me know what you think about all the stuff that I didn't talk about. It's difficult. I even have, I have a bunch of stuff written in the notes right here that you'd be hard pressed to read it even at that distance. Let's see.
I think I found it.
Yeah, maybe. So, but it doesn't matter because even my notes are vague. I don't know. I don't like to put like this happened and this exactly happened and this exactly happened. I would say that there's a great deal, like I said earlier. It's going to be unsettling because there are so many things. One of which being like there are racial epithets all over this book. And there are actions that in the story they're not based in a racial profiling way necessarily if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, but they most definitely are. So I think that this story could only happen the way it does during the time period it's set in, but it's not so. I mean, just turn on any news source and you can see that that what it goes through is definitely still occurring. So it's that whole like terror of the familiar thing, and it really punches hard, especially when you find that the villains of the piece aren't nearly as flushed out as it would be to another author who might be kind of mollycoddling the readers. So there you go. Those Across the River. It is fantastic. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not horrific. It's absolutely horrific, but it comes from such a quiet, almost serene place that you're nowhere near ready for it, even when you're looking at it. And yeah, the characters take you away from it. You're so interested in what they're doing that you're not necessarily not paying attention to what's going on, but you're so interested in them and the life and the people and the interactions that when it does happen, it just blows you away. So there you go. I guess Monday again. You gonna be available? Okay, so unless something happens in between now and then, should be having another non-entry on Monday. And yeah, definitely get back to me in the Gmail. I had another mail for Diabolical Index, but it just seems like everybody uses Gmail. Do you find?
I mean, that's what I use.
Yeah, it seems like everybody uses it, so I just made this, and this is attached to the questionable index. So once I get that going, then it'll make sense for that too. So yeah, definitely read the book. Get back to me on that. And I was thinking on the way up here. What's that now?
Talking for just a second. I was downloading this bumper real fast.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was thinking of something. I was like, maybe I should have a better closing thing. And the only thing I could come up with was just like it's such a dad joke. I don't even know, but
Here you go. Pick one.
well, no. I mean, I thought of one, but I mean, I guess you could say it's a riddle. But the one I was thinking of was there's just remember, there's only one C that grows larger when you read a book. Literacy. Oh my god, I'm such a dipshit. Having a 12-inch nose is anatomically possible because at that point it becomes a foot. That's great. I like those. But anyway, yeah. I actually spoke to everybody about going to the pun off in Austin next year. But yeah, definitely check out Diabolical Index on Anchor and everywhere else. Anchor puts it on Spotify and Podbean and a bunch of places. But that's a little bit later than us. So you get to see it live here, audio only on those things. And hopefully with any luck, once I get all my transfers and stuff happening on the regular, I'll be able to do my my prefixes again. And, my little whatevers. My little supplementals. I'm making a separate area on the YouTube for the supplementals and interviews. And hopefully, with any luck, there will be some further interviews coming up in the next couple of months. I've got some family stuff. I've got some Midwest Horror Fest stuff coming up, so I'm going to have to kind of weave it in through everything else. But I'm so glad everybody showed up tonight. Hopefully, you got something out of it. Hopefully, you're interested in reading everything. With these, I attempt to try to make it so that I talk about it. I talk about some of the things in it. I don't say so much that, it's like the too long didn't read crap. I hate that shit. The TLDR shit. I hate that. So I try not to make it so that I'm giving the entire book away so that you don't have to read the book once you've seen, the Diabolical Index. Hopefully, when you watch it, you go, oh, wow. that guy's an idiot. But what he was talking about sounds really interesting. So you just like go out and you buy the book, or go to your nearest library and give them a little bit of circulation so they can keep going. There was a big debate the other night in my my little comment stream, my feed, where someone put a receipt up of how much the money they saved in books by going to the library instead of buying books. And of course there were comments of, well, those authors are out that money when they do that shit. And it's like, they bought the damn books when they went to put in the library. They're not on any fucking money. Well, I mean, I guess they are a little bit, but anything that makes the library a viable resource is important. So you can do it all, man. Like, I still get stuff at the library, and I buy books all the time. So visit your local library. Look for Those Across the River, Christopher Buehlman, David Sedaris. Check him out, too. I actually hadn't even heard of this one by him. So, oop, darn it. Definitely check those out. I'm so Twitter-pated. I'm just dropping books everywhere. Yeah, hopefully, with any luck, there are still Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventures to choose from for next week. So I might put a poll up, or I might just choose it myself. The last time we did the poll, the one that we picked wasn't that great. So this last time I picked it myself, and it ended up pretty snazzy. I like Batwing Hall a lot. So, yeah, edit me dropping the book out of that live. So, anyhow, this Diabolical Index for August 26th, 2019. Beware your human heart, because this is where the pages of the uncanny reside. And Magic Squirrel Network, keep it squirrely.
Wow, that was a great podcast that you just listened to, wasn't it, Mark?
It certainly was.
But if you want to listen to another great podcast, you should check out Pointless Discussions. Hi, I'm Paul Schroyer.
And I'm Mark Reynolds.
We're the hosts of the comedy improvised podcast, Pointless Discussions, which comes out every Tuesday.
You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and anywhere you listen to podcasts.
If you like comedy or improv, then we're the podcast for you. Join us every week as we go on an adventure that we don't even know is happening until it happens. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or at www.magicsquirrelnetwork.com.
Pointless discussion.